I'm Marion Wilson, and I am an artist, a visual artist, and also an associate professor at Syracuse University. I've lived in Syracuse for 18 years, and I would say for the first 12 years of that, I paid little to no attention to the fact that I lived in Syracuse, and most of my professional life was commuting to other cities, even to the point of teaching in other cities. And then about 6 or 8 years ago, probably coinciding with some opportunities that arose because of the chancellor coming here, I really started to look much more locally, and both in terms of the environment as well as some of the social issues of Syracuse. Whether it was the collaboration I did with the homeless men down in New York City on the Bowery, commissioned by the New Museum, or MLab, the Mobile Literacy Arts Bus, the renovation of the RV with art and architecture students, or 601 Tully. Even before that, I would say that my work was politically grounded. So even when I was making individual objects, or now having returned to painting, that they're political. They're about the world that we live in, although they strive to not be necessarily ideological, so they may pose a question. I did a whole series of final meals that criminals ate on death row before I started doing public work, and it really was just about us all thinking together what kind of meal we would have. So it was that kind of hook that got the viewer to think about a more charged political issue. And now my interest in endangered and native plants, again, grew out of my really looking at this landscape here, which I've done for the past 6 years. And even though I'm interested in plants in talking about I-81 as opposed to people that were displaced, I'm talking about plants that are displaced, it could be a hook or a way to talk about more charged human issues. About 8 years ago, I became more interested in looking at this area and really having a greater sense of place and paying attention to the landscape. So first it began with my own practice, paying attention to the landscape, and then I got involved through the university and with some of the initiatives introduced by the chancellor in some more public, large-scale projects, such as MLab, which was the renovation of a RV into a mobile classroom that traveled to city schools, which very much had to do with education and access and how one crosses class boundaries. And then I led the design build of 601 Tully, a neighborhood art center on the Near West Side. So what went from more of a kind of individual practice became more of a collective practice in Syracuse, trying to talk about some of the most pressing issues that are in Syracuse, whether education, housing, lack of access to opportunities. Mark was interested in MLab, this mobile bus, possibly being present underneath I-81. The thing that really interests me about the project is this notion of rest stop and this idea that there would be people that pass through I-81. It's basically a transient space. The highways are transient space. I spend a lot of time on the highway driving from city to city, from place to place. And some of the landscapes that I've looked at and some of the plants that I've looked at in my own work, invasives and endangered plants, some of the work I've been doing in my own studio, have focused on plants that crop up along highways. So originally, it wasn't about the displaced communities that occurred in the 50s when I-81 was brought into downtown Syracuse. I think that's a really pressing issue, and I understand that will be the foundation of some other projects. That wasn't necessarily the impulse behind my project. I liked the idea of learning something while you're driving at a rest stop. I mean, it's very, very simple. I mean, that's something that we almost all do. What do we think about when we're driving, when we're passing through? What do we notice? How can we slow that time down? And so that's a slightly different, less political angle. But I think if I could charge that with thinking about disrupted plant life, then it becomes political. And I guess a lot of my work does that. It's maybe not overtly political. It doesn't overtly go in with a political goal, but rather in a more human way or an individual way talks about a social issue or a human issue that then a larger audience can access. So that was a long story, long roundabout way of saying that I'm interested in thinking about the plant life or activating that space through plant life. One thing I was thinking of is turning that whole part of I-81 or just above that one spot into a large raised bed or a planter where one could grow plants around it. I'm beginning with brainstorming here. One of the things I've been photographing is just the sides of the buildings that get overgrown with some invasive weed. So whether or not we could think about the plants that were there before the people that were there. One thing I've read about also is in this area, this was like a salt marsh. So, and frequently, because of the salt on the highways, salt marsh type plants grow up. So there's this interesting connection between the industrial, the post-industrial, the car, and the natural, what was there in the natural world. So that's the sort of overarching thematic angle that I'm thinking about. I'm an artist. So I don't have an expertise in urban development. However, I think that art has the ability to bring people together to at least contemplate an issue from many different angles. And it also sometimes has the possibility to bring people of opposing views together to think about it in a very complex way. So, I mean, even the fact that I would be talking about plants that were displaced as opposed to people that were displaced could be an entrance into talking about more highly charged issues. In my sort of larger public practice in Syracuse, I've worked a lot with redesigning spaces that were seemingly cast off or marginal, and using recycled materials and that kind of thing. However, in my own practice, I'm actually trained as a painter, as an oil painter. I have been interested in scaling up on some of the work that I've been doing, and I also have been really interested in working with a horticulturalist. So I'll just show you a couple of things, and these are really, really small. A lot of the work of the painting work of the past 5 years has been of sort of marginal or endangered landscapes in this area, and I have painted on recycled materials that come out of the photography industry, the film photography industry. When I was building, or beginning to build 601 Tully, the Syracuse University Library sent out a call that they were throwing away or getting rid of or deaccessioning 300,000 slides, art slides that they had over the years, and that everything was going to go digital. And being not super young that I am, I have a long history with slides, art slides. I've always taken slides. Everything's digital now. So I went and got the entire painting collection, all the cabinets, all the paintings that they'd had. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of slides and cabinets. And we use it as a wall, like a dividing gallery wall in 601 Tully. And there's also like a recycled church pew as a wall. So 601 Tully is like an amalgamation of recycled materials. But also, sort of selfishly, I was very interested in the archives of that slide for my own painting practice. So now I've slowly started to siphon through it, first using some of the images, then the glass, and now these small cards that are the dividers from the dividers of the slides. So these, for instance, and I will send you a better image of it, are images of the Solvay waste beds, which are 1,400 acres of sterile soil along the lakes of Onondaga Lake. And another artist and I, about 5 years ago, became self-claimed artists in residence and were given permission to go into the Solvay waste beds. And I began painting again after not painting for many years, and just painted very traditional landscapes on really, really miniature pieces of glass. And so all of these are painted on slide glass, when slides are made with glass. And they're just pieces of glass slide that I get off the internet. I had some in my studio, and then I mount them behind these larger chunks. So that is of the Solvay waste beds. And then similarly, a lot of my work is sort of researching and cataloging. And these are difficult to see, but I've been invited by Cornell University to do very large images on their windows. It's an IMP building. So I've been thinking about how to turn, and you know, architects or designers in this would have really good ideas about this. Maybe this would just trigger something, but the sort of quest was how to make something really small, really large. So I make these miniature paintings. Now, how do you take those images and make them very, very large? So I developed this recipe of acrylic gel skins at Golden Paint Residency, where the skin is peeled off, it's sort of cast, and attaches directly to pieces of glass. And then you can also do it in interference colors, so that different kind of color passes through it. It looks blue at one time, and it's orange when you look at it another way. And I know that for this project, you're thinking about these large screens, making these very large screens, and I'm actually making a 24-foot skin that's going to hang, and the light will pass through and project a small video on it of sorting through slides. So there may be some way to engage this idea of the plants that existed there, like the history of the plants that are there, projected onto some kind of screen that I make. These are like pages or skins, and again, I'm just showing this just so that maybe there'll be some ideas. These are from card catalogs, from slide catalogs also, those little cards and dividers that separate the actual slides that I then use to cast in these gels and make work. So there's always this connection to history and a kind of reuse or of things that cataloged information, kind of libraries of information. Those are the sorts of materials that I'm interested in. I think that's sort of how my brain works, like multiple images that talk about one subject. This project could be very site-specific, and I do work in a pretty site-specific way, or I have worked in quite a site-specific way. I do exhibit in galleries and museums. However, even at this show at the Johnson Museum, which is about sustainability, I'm exhibiting in the kind of interstitial spaces, which would be the windows. It's a space that you may not necessarily notice at first as an exhibition space, but then it becomes activated. So I'm really interested in those kinds of zones, which is why this project is of such interest to me. I've been thinking a lot about scale recently because I have worked very small on these recycled photographic ephemera, whether it's through painting or cards or these cataloging cards. And this is an opportunity to really, take that scale and make something very, very large, but then also bring the experience of viewing it back to a kind of human scale. So I wouldn't necessarily be the person, the artist, who would have a huge, large projection of something, but rather I might project something quite small and intimate on something very large. So that's something that I've really tried to work with also, to have the viewer, manipulate the viewer's physical relationship to the work so that they have to come very close to it, or they have to slow down and stop. And I think that's very interesting when it comes to a highway project, rest versus going 60 miles an hour. What does one do when they pause? So I think those are the kinds of, that's another issue I'm really thinking about for this project, that you experience it at a pace that's different than a car, or you experience it at the pace of a car.